everyone, and welcome back to Sightless Fun, a podcast about board game accessibility for people who are blind and visually impaired. I am your host, Ertay, and today I have the pleasure to talk to Nancy Feldman, yet another blind board game enthusiast. Welcome to the show, Nancy. How are you doing?
I'm all right. It's nice to be here, Ertay. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you very much for accepting my invite. So today in this episode with Nancy, we're going to talk about the challenges of brailling board games, as well as how Braille can improve the accessibility of tabletop games. Before we start, Nancy, could you tell us a bit about yourself? Like, what's your background? Where do you come from?
Oh, sure. I'm a mother of 4 daughters. They're all adults now, but they've been board gaming with me since they were about 6 or 7. I'm a software developer for the state of Colorado out here, and I also am the team lead for our team. So I have a team of about 7 developers that I work with. And I'm also the fur mom to 2 cats. And I also happen to be blind, and I've been blind since birth. I used to be able to see colors and things like that, but now I don't see anything at all.
We share the same profession. I'm also a software developer myself, currently trying to adjust, but yeah, that's very nice to hear. So, when did you get into board games? Like, do you remember the first game that got you hooked?
Actually, the first game that got me hooked, my aunt, who was quite an amazing and interesting woman, decided to teach me poker when I was about 11. And so at that time, we found a deck of Braille cards, and we bought it. And I would play with my aunts and uncles. And I remember one time when I was about 13, I won quite a large pot of money, at least for a girl of 13. And they're like, "We're not going to play with you anymore." So that was fun. But the family also played. We played backgammon, and I had a friend who was also blind, who was a very good chess player. And so he taught me chess. He actually was rated, had one of those.
Oh.
Yeah, he was being trained by some chess professional. I can't remember who. So I turned out not to like chess because I was one of those people who he managed to defeat in precisely 4 moves. And I said, I'll never play chess after that. But later, what happened is I met my husband-to-be, and he said, "We should play board games." And I'm like, well, okay. All I have is Monopoly and
the classic game,
Scrabble, all the brailled games that are out there, right? And he's like, no, you don't understand. And so the first game he showed me was Diplomacy. And, it was this big board, and there's no markings on it. And I'm like, how am I going to play this thing? And it turned out we used Dymo tape to mark all the spaces on the board so I could see what was, how the map was laid out. It was probably not really necessary because after a few games, I learned, Bulgaria borders Greece and Constantinople and, whatever. And so I didn't need all that, and I never touched the board after that. So, but I still have the board with its Dymo taped.
Oh, you still
spaces.
have it?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, wow.
Nowadays I play on the Judge and I don't use it, so I just play electronically.
I haven't played Diplomacy before. I remember when I was growing up, I think they released a couple of video games as well, but I never had the chance to play it. One of my older cousins, I remember he was playing it, but I was too young then to learn how to play that. But yeah, that's really nice.
It is. My only caution about Diplomacy is it's hard on friendships. Just be careful.
But yeah, I mean, you ended up marrying your husband, so
I did, and we have 4 girls, so
it turned out well. How often do you play? Like, do you play with your family right now? Do you have any friends, or do you have a regular group of people?
All of those, all of the above. I play with my family. All of us are board gamers. Like I said, the girls have been gaming since they were 6 or 7 when we bought Magic the Gathering for the first time. So I play with the girls and with their spouses, but we also have a monthly game group that, various of our friends come over. And then I sometimes go to stores and play at game stores. And then I went just recently to OrcaCon, And I actually played in 2 tournaments there and won one of them.
What game was that?
It's a game called Nevermore. And the funny thing is, I hadn't played it until the convention.
Oh, so it was your first time.
It was my first time. And so my daughter Sammy, who was with me, and a friend of ours said, well, let's play it once before the tournament to make sure we know how it works. And then I went on to win, and that was kind of fun. So I even have a trophy.
Oh wow, that's awesome.
Yeah,
I'm guessing all of the other players were sighted.
They were, yeah. And I got the standard comments, oh, well, you're playing with marked cards. And I'm like, fine, then I will not touch any deck except for the cards in front of me. And so I made them shuffle and deal because I'm like, all right, I hear you.
That's really nice. I was going to ask you about OrcaCon a bit later, but now that you mentioned it, how was the experience there? Did you meet any other blind gamers?
Only a friend that came with me. She lives in the Seattle area, and she said she wanted to go, so she came with us, but no one else. There were other gamers there with disabilities, though. I went to several panels where Jeremy Crawford, who's the line designer for D&D, was speaking, and there were interpreters there for sign language.
Yeah.
And so that was pretty cool. And as I think someone said that there was a all-day sign language gaming, D&D in ASL, American Sign Language. So that was cool too. But I did not meet any other blind gamers, and so I was a little disappointed about that.
Oh, yeah.
But the con itself was wonderful. Played lots of board games. Even played a game of D&D. So.
Did you get to talk to any publishers? Did anyone ask you about any accessibility related questions? Or did you get to play test a game that's not published or something?
No, OrcaCon is a little small. It's new, and so I did not happen to see any new games. Although I played New York Slice a little bit as I was trying to figure out how I would braille the pizza game. What they had games on the table that you could check out and play, but of course none of them came with Braille already, and so we had to try to find games that we could test out without, that I had basically had a lot of public information. Right. Because otherwise we had to play the stuff I brought. And I got to tell you, as a blind gamer, when you pack to go to a convention, at least for me, I brought 2 suitcases and most of them were full of games. And I just stuffed clothes in the corners. That was crazy.
So I'm assuming you had someone sighted with you, or were you just alone with your other blind friend? Was it easy to navigate around? And
I had my daughter Sammy with me, who is sighted. All my daughters are, but we went around without her at times too. And sure, it's a little hard to navigate, especially in the crowds. Not everyone is paying attention to our long white canes, and so you just have to be a little cautious. But it was easier, I'll admit, when Sammy was with us because she could see the obstacles. I'll give a quick plug for Ira, though, because when I wanted to go through the dealer's hall and see what was for sale, I could take Ira with me, and the person on the other end of the call could describe what was on the tables. And so if, say, I wanted to buy Sammy something and not tell her in advance, right, I could go in there independently and find things. So that was nice.
That sounds great. I mean, if it was helpful, how does that work exactly? Do you have a camera? Yes,
you use the camera on your phone, or they send you glasses that you can use that has a camera on one of the earpieces. And so you can put those on and you can walk around and they see what you would be seeing if you could see. And so it's pretty cool.
Oh, awesome. So before we move on to talking about Brailling games, I'm quite curious about what your current favorite game is.
It's a tough question, and I've thought about this for a while, and it's still a tough question. On the one hand, I would say Dominion. It's been my long-term favorite. I like deck building games, and I like Dominion because it's different every time, and you have to puzzle it out. So you look at those 10 cards that are available this game, and you try to figure out how are they going to work together to create the best engine. And I really enjoy that. Most recently, however, my daughter, her Board Game Geek Secret Santa got her Near and Far.
Oh, yes.
And we love that game. We just played the heck out of it over Christmas, and it was wonderful. So I doubt her Santa is listening, but thank you. we probably played 6 or 7 games, and we're about ready to start again. Right now, we're in Girl Scout cookie season, and so my granddaughter is selling Girl Scout cookies, and so there isn't quite as much gaming going on this month until that's done, because Emily has decided she wants to sell 1,000 boxes of Girl Scout cookies.
Great job, Emily. Keep it up.
Yeah.
That's the spirit.
Yep.
I'm also quite curious about your process of learning games. Do you learn by yourself, or do you have a sighted person teach you? Like, what do you prefer?
Actually, I'm the one who's more likely to read the rules before we play, because I read them before I start brailing a game, so that I can figure out what's important in the game. And so typically what happens is I read the rules, I braille the game, and then I teach everybody else how to play. So that's generally how it works. I'm fortunate in that everybody in the household is a gamer.
Yeah.
And so if they don't understand, they'll ask. Also, we do make sure, even when I'm instructing, I'm like, okay, have you picked up these cards, or have you picked up these cubes, and where did you put them? And that way I just try to be as precise as I can when teaching. But the other thing that happens is if they're uncertain, they'll just pick up the print rule book, and often the print rule book has pictures.
Yes.
And so they will look at that if they don't understand something I'm telling them.
Those pictures in the print rule books are the worst part about digital rule books, especially those graphics where they have like lines sticking out. And for instance, some of the rulebooks have letters like A is, player deck, B, infection deck. And when you go through the digital rulebook, oh my God.
I know. It makes it so hard. And then I'm obsessive, so I tend to edit the rulebook and clean out all that stuff, but that takes extra time too.
I recently found a website where this guy is making a project. He's creating rulebooks in Markdown, so he ignores everything that's image related graphics and just grabs the raw text and writes it down in Markdown, which converts it to HTML, and it's quite fast to navigate the rulebook. Basically, you have the headings and everything, so it's pretty neat. And I hope he can join me on the show and talk about it, because he accidentally has created something that can be very useful for us blind gamers.
Absolutely. So I'm all in. If you can send me the URL, that'd be great.
Yeah, I will. I definitely will. I post it in the show notes as well for others to interested in checking it out. Sorry for the technical terms that I use there, but what you need to get out of that is that it's very useful for navigating with a screen reader. Okay, so let's move on to Brailling games. Could you tell us how blind people read Braille? In case most of our listeners are probably familiar what Braille is, but could you just give us a brief overview of what Braille is and how you read it?
Oh, sure. Braille is a system of raised dots. So each character or symbol is comprised of some number of 6 dots. So there are 3 dots on the left of a cell and 3 dots on the right. And so, for instance, your letter A might be the top left dot, while Q is all 3 dots on the left side and the top 2 on the right. And so each of those combinations forms a different shape, and you read those shapes with your fingertips. And Braille also has symbols for certain common groups of characters like THE. And so that helps to compact it, because Braille already takes up a lot of space, which you'll hear about again in this podcast, I'm sure, because it's one of my big challenges with Braille. So you use these symbols. You might use the symbol for the or the symbol for AR to help take up less space. And you just read them with your fingertips. I learned Braille in kindergarten when my peers were learning print. So I went to a public school, and we would, I'd be in the regular classes reading Janet and Mark, which was our equivalent to Dick and Jane, and and they would be reading. They'd be reading print, and I'd be reading Braille.
Could you share your process of Brailling games? Like, do you purchase already Brailled accessibility kits, or do you Braille your own games?
Mostly I braille my own games. The first accessibility kits I saw were from, oh, now I can't think of his name.
64-ounce games?
64-ounce games, yeah.
Richard?
Richard. All I could think of was Richard, and then I was like, what's his last name? Anyway, and I didn't see those, of course, until I think a couple years ago, right? And
Yeah.
I did buy a few of his, but they take a bit of time between both me and a sighted person to get all the stickers applied to the sleeves and then the cards in the right sleeves. And so I'd been brailing games for many years by then on my own. And so I don't tend to use the accessibility kits.
Mm-hmm.
Instead, I go and buy the game, usually from Amazon or from Cool Stuff or someplace like that. And then while the game is on its way to me, I go find the rules online. And most of the time nowadays, the rules are in a format I can read, although some of the rules are still scanned image, and
Yeah.
I can't read those.
The worst.
So I have a reader read those. Yeah, those are the worst. And then by the time the game gets here, I usually have some idea of how I want to braille it. And I will usually sit down with a reader and we'll, separate out components and determine what needs to be brailled, what doesn't need to be brailled. And then, for instance, oftentimes what needs to be brailled are the cards. And if there's a lot of card text on them, well, I mean, the reader's going to read the card text and I'm going to transcribe it.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm going to think about how I want to put that on the card, because the card text won't fit on the card. I mean, there's just not enough room. Braille's too big.
Those are some of the problems, I guess.
Oh, yeah. So oftentimes what I do is put some kind of number on the card.
Mm-hmm.
And I want the number to be as expressive and useful to me as it can. So I don't know, I'll use, there's a game called Epic Spell Wars, and it has qualities, and it has, I think they're creatures or whatever. And so I make sure that the number is something like Q22, which means it's the 22nd quality, right? So I already know, looking at a card, that it's a quality, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I get as much information onto the card as I can, because one of the concerns I have when I'm playing is I don't want to slow down the game. I don't want to be, it comes to Nancy's turn and it takes 10 minutes.
Everyone, cigarette break.
Yeah, exactly. I don't want it to be like that. And so I try to play as quickly as I can. But in order to do that, I have to put as much information on the card as I can. So, for instance, on a Magic the Gathering card, I'm going to have that number that tells me, well, it's a blue card and it's the 22nd blue card you've brailled. But then it's also going to have the casting cost. And if it's a creature, it's going to have its power and toughness. I mean, just things that I'm going to need to reference quickly. Right.
Yeah.
And so then I braille the cards, and we also have to figure out, are there other things we need to braille? Bomb Squad Academy, for instance, has these tokens that tell you, did you disarm the bomb or did you make it explode?
Right.
Okay. And so the token says either okay or boom. The problem is that the tokens are too thick to braille.
Oh, yes.
And yeah, I can't do it. So what we decided to do, it's a little awkward, but we put each token in a sleeve.
Mm-hmm.
And I put okay or boom on the sleeve.
Oh, right.
Now, I wasn't going to do that at all, but we talk about one of the problems you have is if information can be private, right,
Mm-hmm.
then I need to have a way to access it. So, for instance, one of the powers in the game of Bomb Squad Academy lets you look at the face-down tiles and see whether the next one is a boom or an okay.
Okay, yeah.
And that's not information that the other people at the table would get. And so I need to be able to look. Otherwise, if it was just, well, whenever you flip it up, it reveals, I wouldn't worry about it.
Yeah. Couldn't you have just used something like, I don't know, transparent tape, just to mark, for instance, okays and leave the booms alone? So just something tactile?
we probably could have, but and I actually have 2 Dymo tape labelers, but I couldn't find them. And so I was just like, oh, well, this is what we're going to do because we want to play.
Yeah, right. Usually, my most used tool is just normal sellotape.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah.
When you mentioned like in Magic the Gathering, for instance, referencing the cards and everything, it's also important. Like if you play many different games, I mean, sure, you will come up with some kind of mental code like to reference things. But I'm guessing when you play more games, you tend to forget. Like, for instance, I have marked my Colt Express cards with ordinary tape. For instance, I mark the card to move up or down. I've put a sticker in the center middle. Top center of the card. To move left, right, I have it on the right side of the card. The gun is bottom right corner, for instance.
Oh.
And I mean, just I have coded the tape with something that I can reference the cards. But if I don't play it long enough, I tend to forget, like, was top corner the gun or was it the loot card? So I first, before we start, need to just remind myself, or the better idea would be just to write that down and then go through it before starting to play. And it's also a mental, like, you need to do additional mental math, basically. It's not math, but you work on it rather than just focusing on what other players are doing in the game and trying to come up with a strategy. So you have an additional layer of things to calculate about.
You do. And I had to chuckle because I've had this problem recently. We pulled out a game, I think it was in the Year of the Dragon, that I'd brailled, oh my gosh, years and years ago. And I couldn't remember what all my symbols meant. And so now what I try to do is after I braille a game, I scribble some notes to myself that says, this is what this means, and that's what that means.
Yeah, that's the smart thing to do, because the more you play different games and then come back to revisit ones that you've already like brailled or marked in a way, you need to just remind yourself of what you meant at the time when you were marking the cards.
Absolutely, because I have over 200 games here, and I think probably about 175 of them are brailled right now. Maybe more. I'd have to go through and look. And so it's a lot to remember. There's no way I could remember it all.
Do you buy sleeves for all of your games that you braille? Because, for instance, I don't think I will ever sell Colt Express, but I didn't want to put sellotape on top of the cards, so I decided to buy some sleeves for the cards just in case I want to resell them later and just to keep that value.
That's fair, and that makes me think of a story I'll tell you now. So first, no, I don't buy for everything. A lot of I like things like trick-taking card games and that kind of thing. And for a lot of those, I just braille on the card. But, years and years ago, when I first started playing Magic, I was at OrcaCon, which was a science fiction convention in Oregon where I was living at the time. And someone said, hey, I bought these cards, but I don't think I like Magic the Gathering, so I'll sell you a complete set for $100. And I went, oh, sure, we like this game. And these turned out to be alpha and beta set cards. And I didn't even think about it. Back then, I just didn't think about it. I brailled them all. I put Braille on all the cards, the Black Lotus, all the mocks, everything. And then later, I learned that I could have sold the set for thousands of dollars, but it was worth absolutely nothing. Because of the Braille. So I do play Magic now, but not to the extent that I did back then. I used to buy every expansion as it came out and, buy 3 boxes of the expansion booster packs so that I could get all the cards, right? I don't do that anymore, but even so, I sleeve all my Magic cards, everything, because I can't do it.
Yeah. During our back and forth on Twitter, you did mention that you have Sagrada in your collection.
I do.
We talked about Sagrada with Jed back in episode 2, and we weren't really quite sure how playable Sagrada would be for someone who is completely blind. I believe we mentioned something like using an Excel spreadsheet if you really, really want to play it, but you did mention to me that you can play that game blind. Would you mind sharing what modifications you did to the game so it's more accessible to the blind?
Sure. That's actually a game where I didn't braille any of the cards because all of the cards are. Okay. I did braille the goals because the goals are private information.
Yeah.
But everything else is public information. What I did, though, is for each of the stained glass designs, it has a pattern. So it shows you this has to be a blue. You have to put a blue one here or a 6 here. And then for the white spaces, you know that you can put anything there. So I have a map that shows each of those. So my line might say blue 6, white 3, yellow. Okay.
Right.
And then the next line below it has the next pattern and so on and so forth. So when I choose one of these to play, I copy it to an empty file. I use a Braille Sense to play games.
Mm-hmm.
And I copy it to an empty file. And then as it's my turn to pick a die, just like everyone else, I look at, well, I need a blue one. And there's a blue 6 here. And so that's going to be better than a blue 2. So I'm going to take that blue 6. And then I change. Well, that used to say blue. And now I just write 6. Right? Or I write blue 6 there. And so now I know I have a blue 6 there. And I've actually won at Sagrada, so it works just fine. But, it's just one more thing. So as soon as I pick my die, I write down what it was. And also, the Sagrada, the window that you put your cards in has raised spaces where you can put your dice. So I can even place my own die, right? Because I know, it goes in the third space on the top row, and so I can reach down and put it there. So none of that's a problem. I do have to play with other sighted people because I can't tell what color the dice are.
Right.
And so the other thing we do that's a modification is whoever rolls the dice, as soon as they've sorted them out, they list off all of the dice that were rolled, and I write those down.
Mm-hmm.
And then as somebody picks a die, I cross it off so that I know.
What was the device that you used?
It's a Braille Sense. It's an electronic note taker.
And I see.
I have it in front of me right now, and it has my scribbled notes to help me remember answers, that kind of thing. So it displays the Braille on display, so it raises the pins.
Right.
It has pins, and it raises them for each different cell, and that's how I read Braille on this. And it has all the card text for all the cards and all the games that I have brailled so far.
Oh, wow, it's awesome.
It's awesome.
So you already mentioned some common problems that you encounter when brailing, for instance, the tokens that you talked about Bomb Squad. What are some other problems? Like, have you had any problems with long descriptions?
We'll use Pathfinder, the adventure card game, as an example.
Mm-hmm.
That game has a lot of text on the cards. Oh my gosh. And that text I could not braille it all on the card. The cards are too small, and I know they're standard sized, but they're still too small.
Yeah.
And so that's where I just write a card number on the card, and then I have a file that has that number, and then I write down all of the card text associated with that card. So I look up that number, and I can read the entirety of the card text. Now, that's one of those where I always worry that I slow things down, because in Pathfinder, you often have a hand of several cards, and you're trying to build a strategy for how you're going to defeat whatever thing is in front of you right now. And so what I try to do, because you tend to play the same character for a while, is start to memorize the cards that are going to typically appear in my deck so that I don't have to look them up each time.
Yeah.
But even so, I think there's a little bit of a lag as I play.
More mental
Fortunately,
math.
yes, like you said, there's always one more layer for us, because we're trying to keep track of things that that are difficult, that other people don't have to, because they can just look at the card.
Yeah.
And you mentioned problems with brailing games. Sometimes it's not even that. We can braille information, we can have everything available, and still sometimes it's tough. I'll give you an example of a game that probably people have heard of, Ticket to Ride.
Yeah.
Okay, I know that to go from Portland to Salt Lake City is 6 blue. Fine, I know that I can collect 6 blue and do that, right? Or Portland to Seattle's 1 gray. Fine, But as I'm building my routes, Other people are building their routes too,
Oh, yeah.
right? And people are buying things on the board that I might need later. And if I don't somehow keep track of that, then I have to ask questions.
Yeah.
Okay. And any question I ask is likely to give something away about my hand. So if I say, well, what paths are left into New Orleans, right? Then
Yeah. Oh, Nancy's going.
to New Orleans, right?
Yeah.
And so what I have started to do in recent plays of Ticket to Ride is every time somebody buys something, I write it down. James bought, New Orleans to Miami or whatever, right? And that helps.
Does that slow down the game?
No, not typically, unless I forget. Like occasionally I forget to do it, and I'm like, oh, what did people buy? But no, it doesn't. The Braille sense is really quick. One of the other challenges is I typically pay readers to help me Braille games, and so that's a process that can get expensive. I could use my family to help me Braille games, but because all of us are, I mean, we all work full time and all of that. When they have free time, I want to play games instead of Braille games, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And so I use readers a lot to help me Braille games. So that gets expensive. The other thing is sometimes I buy a game, and because brailing a game can take a long time, sometimes I have games that have been around for a long time that I haven't actually brailled. Maybe it was a shiny purchase, which meant, oh, it looked good at the time. And then I buy something else that looks more interesting, and so that gets brailled first. And eventually this game that I bought just keeps moving down the queue and doesn't get brailled. And so that's why when I tell you I have 200 plus games and maybe only 175 brailled, it's because the whole process takes time.
Right.
And so that can be very, very frustrating, especially if somebody else really wants to play the game and then they say to me, well, can you braille this first? And I'm like, well, okay, fine. But then other things just slide down the queue. So that's a little frustrating. Also, sometimes I braille a game, and then only after playing it do I realize that, oh, I should have brailled this game differently. So, as an example, Seven Wonders.
Mm-hmm.
That one I could fix, but for instance, there are cards that you only use in 3-player games or 4-player games or 5-player games. Various
Right.
the way Seven Wonders works, it's like that. And also there are cards that are only used in the first age or the second or the third. And I didn't braille any of that information on the card, which means that I can't help sort and put things away because I don't know where things go.
Oh,
So
yeah.
that's a minor example, but I brailled something recently where I think I used the colors of the cards when it turned out that the suits of the cards were more valuable information.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was just sort of annoyed that I missed that. And
Yeah. Usually, if you don't really try the game to play it for a couple of times before, you don't find the most efficient way, I guess, on what needs to be marked and what's more important. And yeah, I see how that can be a bit frustrating.
it can be. Another example that I actually could go back and fix. When I first started Brailling Dominion, I didn't have a Braille writer.
Mm-hmm.
A Braille writer, for those who might not know, is a machine that looks, well, no, it doesn't look like it. It's similar to a typewriter, but it has only a few keys because, again, Braille is a combination of 6 dots, right? So
Yeah.
it's got 6 keys and a space bar. And I didn't have one for a long time. And so I was brailing cards with a slate and stylus. And that's a very manual effort where you take the stylus and you put the card in between 2 pieces of metal to hold it in place, and you use the stylus to punch the braille onto the card. And yeah, so
That sounds slow.
it is slow and it's painful. I used to have, I kid you not, calluses from brailing games, especially games like Dominion that had like 500 cards. So for games like Dominion, all I wrote on the card was the name of the card.
Yes.
Okay. Because I just didn't have the energy, and I just would have destroyed my hands to braille. Well, like it gives you 2 extra actions or it gives you 2 extra coins. And so I
Mm-hmm.
didn't do all that. That information, if you want me to play quickly, really should have been on the card.
Yeah, right.
And so I really need to go back now that I do have a Braille writer. This one I wouldn't need sighted assistance for because I already know the information, right? It's in me. It's all written down in the Braille sense. So I would just go back and take all those cards, okay, and add that information to the card. But I have not done that because time, and I think there are several thousand Dominion cards now.
One thing that I should share here is that one Redditor in the blind subreddit, on one of my posts, he shared that he has created a website specifically for Dominion, so accessible with a screen reader. I believe he's a web accessibility engineer.
Oh.
And he really loves to play Dominion, so he created a website where all he would need is the name of the card, and he has created tables, well, not tables, but different pages for, I don't know, different sets of cards, so you can very quickly access the full text of the card using your phone, let's say VoiceOver on your iPhone, because he has marked headings and everything, and he can just quickly jump through and read the full description after touching the card, so the Braille on the card, to read the name and just scroll down to that card using his phone.
See, that's awesome too. Yeah, that's another way to go.
Yeah, I'll definitely put the link in the show notes as well, and also send it to you so you can check it out.
One of the things that makes me sad is a lot of these board game companies are now also releasing apps for their games, and many of the apps are not accessible.
Yeah.
And that's really frustrating because I would play them. I would play them a lot if I could play with other people across the country and actually be able to see everything I needed to know to play.
Yes.
Because sometimes, for instance, I do not think my family has the same passion I do for Dominion, so I don't get to play it as often as I would like.
Mm-hmm.
And if I could play it online, you wouldn't see me anymore, Ertay. I'd just be like, okay, I'm going to go play Dominion. This is all my free time. This is what I would do with it. So, also similarly, I think there's an app for Pathfinder Adventure card game, which I would play. I like that game a lot. And again, my family doesn't have the same zeal.
Tastes.
Yeah. So, they want to play things more like Sagrada and Seasons and things like that, and I'm fine with those games too. But if I could play remotely, that'd be awesome. And I appreciate there are obviously various designers out there who are doing some accessible games, but not really anything like I want to hit the table, right?
Yeah.
And so I feel really bad because my friends are like, well, why don't you play this, or why don't you play that? No, I want to play Seven Wonders, or I want to play Teach-U. Oh my gosh, I want to play Teach-U. And Teach-U seems like it would be very simple to make accessible because it's cards, right? And it's a suit and a number, or maybe like the Hound or something, right? And I'm like, please, just make it accessible so I can flip through my hand like everybody else and select a card. And I don't understand. I suppose that most people just don't think about it.
Yeah, I mean, because there's not too many games, and sometimes I really get the itch to play something with someone else, like not alone. So I was going through the App Store and Googling about games compatible with VoiceOver, the screen reader on iOS, and I found Dice World. So I'm gonna play Yahtzee, and I mean, it's a huge, let's say, so if we say King of New York or King of Tokyo is a horse, Yahtzee is, I don't know, well, I don't want to offend anyone, but maybe a donkey. So going from a horse to a donkey.
I was thinking more like guinea pig. Yeah, it's exactly right. I can play Yahtzee, but why? And there's so many. I mean, there are even Yahtzee-like games that are better. And so it's very frustrating when my option is Yahtzee. And I'm sorry if I offend anyone here, right? It's just I want to play something a bit more challenging.
Okay, so you mentioned long descriptions. Mm-hmm. Have you had any problems with putting the games back in the box after you braille them. I've seen Magic the Gathering video where one guy was brailing his Magic cards and he showed the deck like it was skewed to one side and it was much more bulky, so he needed a larger box to carry it. So I'm assuming you're also having those issues with your games, because let's say like most games, even if you just put sleeves, they don't fit in the box or insert anymore. So
Correct.
with Braille should be a bigger problem.
It's even worse, yes. And so either sometimes when I've bought a deck that, a pre-built deck for Magic, you sleeve it and you braille it. And if you take out everything else that was in the box, because sometimes they have like life token markers and things like that, you can still fit the cards in there, but oftentimes you can't. And so you have to decide what you're going to do about that. Sometimes depending on the game and how protective I am of it, I might put it in a Ziploc bag. I've been known to put the whole box in a large Ziploc bag because the box will no longer close, and this way I can be pretty sure I'm not going to lose the cards. Or I have to get larger boxes and, put the games in there. There are lucky happenstances sometimes. The last Kickstarter for Sentinels of the Multiverse, Oblivion, they had a beautiful, beautiful custom box for all of your Sentinels cards. And it came with enough extra room that even with Braille on the cards, everything fits. And so I just adore that box. And they didn't do it for accessibility. I get that. But I love them anyway for it because I can fit all my cards in there.
That's great.
It is. And then my son-in-law made a big Dominion box for me. And so we put all of the Dominion cards we had in there. And that worked great until I bought the last 2 expansions for Dominion. And so now they're in their own, still in their expansion boxes because they don't fit in the ginormous box that we got. So it's very sad.
We need a bigger box.
Yes. So, but yes, it does make it difficult. Also, sleeved Braille cards or brailled cards in general don't shuffle as well.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. And so there are just some challenges that come with brailing them.
Yeah. So it's not just, you don't really solve everything like by saying, oh, just braille your games.
Right.
You don't really think about introducing dozens of other problems that arise from brailing games.
That's exactly true. And, another one that I haven't mentioned, but should be kept in mind, some of these cards are absolutely gorgeous, right? Yeah. They have lovely art. And those are the kinds of things I'm likely to sleeve and braille the sleeves because even I can't see the art, but I understand that, somebody paid artists to do beautiful work, and I don't want to ruin those cards.
Yeah. Yeah, and one of my earlier episodes where I talk about print and play games, I mentioned that some of the cards don't come with the finished art. And it's interesting that to us that are blind, we don't really care for that. You don't even need text on the cards. It can just be the same card, like just a white blank card. And if someone tells me this is your, skull, and this is your rose, and that's enough for me. This is a skull and this is a rose. So, yeah, but if you do that for all your games, you won't be able to find players. So
exactly, yeah. So.
Yeah, you also need to worry about how the game looks on the table and everything, even though you can't really see it.
Yes, and that's really true. Going back to Sagrada, I'm told that it's just beautiful, right?
Yeah,
and so I couldn't braille anything on those cards. There was no point, right? Because I didn't want to mar the perfection, right?
Yeah.
And it really is about making beautiful designs. My daughters, when they play, they'll take pictures of their completed designs and post them to Facebook and things like that because they look so cool. So,
do you have any tips or advice for someone who would like to braille their games? I don't know, to improve their process, to make it more efficient or anything like that?
If you haven't brailled games before, I'd say start small. Start with what looks to be an easy game to braille that should give you a lot of fun. Example, Sushi Go Party. All you really need to write on the cards is the name of the card. And so you do that, and it's quick to braille, it's easy, and yet I found that most people enjoy Sushi Go Party, right?
Yeah.
And then once you get started, I'd advise you read your rules first, because as I said, this isn't something I always did before. Read all your rules first, get a sense of how the game plays, because that's going to show you what information you need to braille, right? And then I would say I would say, having experienced using both a slate and stylus and a brailer, if you have a brailer, please use your brailer. It's going to give you crisper braille, and it's going to be easier on your hands. It's going to be faster, and you're also more likely to, braille sort of evenly across and get straight lines of braille and that kind of thing. I just have found the brailer to be better. If you're worried about artwork, buy sleeves if you don't want to mess up the card. And just remember, there are different sizes of sleeves, just like there are different sizes of cards. So make sure you get the right size for the cards you're using. The other thing I'd advise you to do, if you're really going to braille a lot of games, is start learning about the different kinds of games. There are tile placement games, there are deck building games, there are trick-taking games, right? There are dexterity games. Okay, so we haven't talked about dexterity games. I don't play them. I got conned into one dexterity game with my grandkids, and I was terrible at it. Okay, now they thought it was funny, but I was terrible at it. So that's my choice, right? I don't braille dexterity games. Well, first of all, there's typically not much to braille,
right?
But I'm not good at them, so I play to amuse other people. But I would learn about the different types of games out there, learn what you like, right? If you want trick-taking games, those are pretty easy to braille. The way the game companies deal with those is they try to come up with clever new variations on trick-taking games, but essentially it's still down to cards and suits. They might be colors or different animal groups or whatever, but it's still suits of cards and tricks for the most part, right? Yeah. But if you want to play a tile placement game, and I don't play a lot of those either because the board tends to change every game, and that can be hard to cope with. Right. So if you're going to try and play tile placement games, you need to come up with a strategy. And I don't have one, right? But if you're going to play that, you need to think about how that's going to work and how you cope with the fact that it's going to change every time. And one of the things I do, if I'm allowed to give other plugs out here.
Yeah, go ahead.
I listen to the Dice Tower podcast every week.
Yeah.
They talk about the games they're playing, and it is by no means a game or a podcast that talks about, how these games work for blind people. But by their description of the game, you can usually tell whether this is going to work for you or not.
Yeah.
So you can also get that from written reviews, and aside from the Dice Tower podcast, they produce a bunch of reviews you can find on YouTube that are just good for giving you an indication, is this game going to be one I can adapt?
If any of our listeners would like to contact you and ask you any questions, can you share your Twitter handle or email, and we'll put that in the show notes?
Sure. My Twitter handle is Laura Vara, which is LORAVARA. And you can reach me by email at lauravara@gmail.com. And I keep telling myself I'm going to blog about this. I'm going to write about the games I play and which ones work well after I've brailled them and which ones don't. But I never seem to do it. So if you'd be interested in seeing me do that, let me know, because that's one of my hurdles, because I keep saying, nobody'd read that if I wrote about that. So if you think I'm wrong, let me know.
Yeah. And also, please also let me know if you liked this talk and would like to see more. And then I can perhaps bully Nancy into coming again for another episode.
I'd be happy to.
Nancy, thank you so much for joining me on this show.
Well, thank you for having me. This has been awesome.
Yeah, it was really great to talk to you. I really enjoyed this chat, and it was quite informative as well. If you have any questions for me, On the other hand, you can send me an email at sightlessfun@outlook.com. You can also check us out on Twitter @sightlessfun or check our website at www.sightless.fun. Thank you very much for listening, and remember, you can still have fun while being sightless. This episode was hosted by Ertay and edited by Alpay Shashko. We'd also like to extend our special thanks to Fighting Windmills for allowing us to use their music in our podcast. You can find them at fightingwindmillsmk.bandcamp.com.